You're listening to The Sister Strain, with another round of our Care to Share series, leading to the screening of our upcoming documentary, The Coalition, on May 16th. We're going to dive a little deeper with 5 of Chatham-Kent's anti-human trafficking coalition members. Each will share about the service organization they operate here in CK, the ways in which they are seeing gender-based violence and human trafficking play out in our community, and the resources they offer survivors of these crimes. Now, a few of these ladies will have an extra bonus as they interviewed with us on topics for our other films, Unhoused, Communities in Crisis, and This Women's Work. So you'll be hearing about how their work is affected by the housing crisis and also their thoughts and experiences as women in the working world. We left that all in because extra information is always a good thing. The only way we can create lasting change is by uniting together and becoming informed. So follow along and, of course, care to share.
I'm Karen Hunter. I'm the Executive Director of the Chatham-Kent Women's Center. And I've been here for just over 9 years now. I've worked in the sector of intimate partner violence now for approximately 38 years. So I started as a very young woman. Very hopeful, very energized by the opportunities to work in this field and to make a difference, to change the lives of women and children and men who are impacted by intimate partner violence, and now that's grown into human trafficking as well. Throughout the years, I've seen a lot of very positive changes in this field of intimate partner violence. It went from the terminology of wife battering and domestic violence to intimate partner and gender-based violence. So lots of positive, inspirational things that have happened throughout the years, but also sadly, a lot of things have not changed throughout the years. And so I find that working in an environment like this is very stressful. It's stressful for myself, my family. It's stressful for my staff. Anyone who really works in this field and comes in contact with women who are being traumatized and abused by the person in their life that should love them the most, that should care about them the most, and how that impacts themselves and their families, their self-esteem, just who they are. So what I found in this community, when I first came to this community, was that I was hearing there wouldn't be a lot of support. It wasn't something that was talked about. It was almost taboo. And working with other agencies was going to be difficult. And, there were certainly some difficulties, but overall, I found people in this community, especially the women, very passionate, very much wanting to find out more information, wanting to collaborate and work together. And I've got a great team that I work with, my staff and board members, but also community-minded individuals, community partners who, I can list them off. They're just wonderful. The hospital, we've got the local hospital here, the domestic assault, sexual assault, crisis trauma team, who have been just excellent to work with. Victim services, fantastic group of women, individuals who are very compassionate and caring. Family Service Kent, Sexual Assault Crisis Center. I can go on. There's just so many different wonderful community partners. And it's important because you can't work in this type of work, in this type of field by yourself. You have to definitely work outside of a silo and work with other community agencies and individuals that you trust, because the work is so difficult. And it's a great field to be in. It's a great field to work in.
Could you sort of walk us through the services that you provide for someone in the community who might come to the Women's Center who would be coming here? What sort of services would they get?
Okay, so the Women's Center is a 24/7 emergency shelter for women and their children who are fleeing intimate partner violence and or human trafficking. Um, a lot has happened since the pandemic, and a lot of people are in crisis, certainly as a result of the increase in housing costs, the lack of social housing, the lack of affordable housing, safe housing. So for women coming to the shelter and support services, there's usually a multitude of problems and concerns. There's been a lot of violence in their life, a lot of trauma, sometimes historical abuse for women that have been raised in violent families and then later in life gotten into a relationship with a partner, usually male partner, but sometimes same-sex relationships, um, and their children, who are witness to the violence. So they are looking to get out of that relationship, get free of the violence, and move on with their children and in their lives. So we provide those support services, the ongoing counseling, um, either individually or in group settings, outreach support services in the community. So it could be in Wallaceburg, it could be in Tilbury, Moraviantown, different places, locations across Chatham-Kent. We have a children's program, a child witness program, again, meeting with children where their needs need to be met. So children that have witnessed the violence, and we do some individual or group counseling services. We run a positive pathways group, which I'm really thrilled to say. We have that in the community. So this is for women who are transitioning away from an abusive partner. So currently they're not in an abusive relationship. They perhaps have stable housing, but they need to move on with their lives. They need something else in their lives. So Positive Pathways brings in some other support partners in the community. It could be police, it could be Gully's Learning Ranch, which is equine therapy. We have a great individual in the community who does some therapy around art therapy, and that's Angel Billicott. Um, we have Family Service Kent who comes in and talks to them about self-esteem. Jamie Kennedy from John Howard Society talking about just some financial security and how to deal with budgeting. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're doing for people to help them move forward in their lives and to gain that independence and just a feeling of security that they don't have to be sufficient or they are self-sufficient. They're not dependent on someone else financially or emotionally. Um, what else do? We do so many different programs. We in 2021 dedicated one of our bedroom spaces, bedroom number 5, we call it, for human trafficking victims. So women from across the community or from outside of Chatham-Kent, across the province, who are being victimized in human trafficking, usually sexual exploitation, sometimes labor as well. Um, they're coming to us and they're staying for a significant period of time. We're dealing with women who are struggling with some addiction issues, mental health issues, and certainly homelessness. Those are some of the uh, issues the struggles that they're having, some of their worries in the community and for themselves and their families.
And no, I was going to say, can you tell us some of the ways um, the Women's Center engages with the community to spread awareness, certain events or activities or places that you show up to share information and spread awareness to the community of Chatham-Kent?
Mhm. So everything from just events on human trafficking that are hosted at the college or at the hospital, different events that perhaps take place that we want to support through Rock Missions or Victim Services. Um, we recently, last fall, did an event, our first event called Shine the Light on Woman Abuse. And so we created a program, a trauma support program for victims, often who are coming to the hospital. Sometimes they were rape victims, sexual assault victims. Sometimes it was intimate partner violence, lots of trauma, and providing those supports so that women could receive trauma support counseling through the Family Service Kent program, um, or our program, and just everything from transportation costs being covered, counseling services, food insecurity, which is also a growing concern in our community, trying to deal with homelessness, all of those issues that are impacting people in our community.
We've spoken a little bit of this because obviously there's a lot of this that happens, but just to be a little more pointed on the question, because it is one of the themes of our project, um, how important is communication and collaboration in terms of building better communities? And
Yeah.
also, if you could speak to kind of where you think Chatham sits in that, as two women who've lived in bigger cities and come back to Chatham, we've seen that the work that's happening in Chatham, we think is pretty progressive. You think the smaller towns are usually like less advanced than the bigger towns, but I think bigger cities could learn something from what we've witnessed here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, when I first came to Chatham, I was a little bit hesitant. I was told that we wouldn't be working really closely with a lot of community partners, that there was some hesitation there, and that's not really what I found. And I think that people were really eager to collaborate. We've got our anti-human trafficking coalition that we've established with a number of different community partners. We work very closely with the police. We got involved with what we call the spa table, and that was an initiative started by the United Way locally during the pandemic. So we found that there was a lot of need for support, supporting each other during that very difficult time. And from that, a lot of agencies grew very close. Link, Children's Aid Society, locally, Family Service Kent, Victim Services, we all, you know, grew together, and even a group from outside of the community that's based in London, Changing Ways, which is a men's program. So we started to work with this particular group because we knew that intimate partner violence, it's not about women against men or men against women. It's about a family and societal issue that has to be dealt with. And if you want to get down to the root cause of why this is happening in our communities and in our societies, then we need to reach out and work with men as well. We started a training program, a trauma training program for new police officers as well. So the spa table trains the new recruits that are coming in. We've had the opportunity of meeting a lot of these young officers, men and women, and talking to them about, dealing with victims of intimate partner violence and human trafficking, and how to best interview and best practices that we're finding work well with victims. And out of that, some real positive changes that we're seeing in the community. It's easy to complain about, this service isn't doing this, or, the police are not doing this, or this isn't happening. But it's another thing to say, look, let's see collectively what we can do together, work together, and try to make this a better, more positive situation. And we're finding that it's working. It's, I can't speak to some of the larger city centers and communities. You would think that there's a vast amount of funding and opportunities and services that are provided in other areas. But I find that in Chatham-Kent, there's a remarkable amount of services and supports for people, and people wanting to get involved, people wanting to collaborate. And again, as I said at the beginning, like, you can't work in a silo, you can't work alone. This is an important issue. This is something that you have to be passionate about, and you have to work collectively and collaboratively with others, or it's just not going to benefit your clients. And that really is at the root of this: is how do you help? How do you support women and children in the community and men, to make it a better, safer community for everyone?
Absolutely. It's interesting that you say that. As we are getting invited into a lot of spaces and learning a lot ourselves, we're realizing that there's multiple other themes happening here, opportunities for educating and sharing information.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we've discussed the secondary project on domestic violence and
Yeah.
femicide and human trafficking, we've also been looking into, with the Dudes Club in town, talking about being a feminist. For me, I'm like, it feels important for me to start exploring how do we encourage more men to break their silences, to be more active, to resource
to be
the
better
help
allies.
and yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
changing ways is what it's called.
Changing ways in London.
I just
That
took a
might be-
note of that.
Yes.
Just like how to have outlets where they can communicate, where they can share, where
Yeah.
they can express, so
Yeah.
that maybe we're getting ahead of these blow-ups when they happen, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think even, to be supportive of individuals who are incarcerated. Like, we know that men don't just wake up one day and look at their partner and decide that they're going to be violent and abusive or murder their partner. It's something that, throughout history, throughout our society, um, different roles that people play, different attitudes, being raised in violent home settings, that when you learn that, if it's a learned behavior, how do you unlearn that? How do you support people? How do you get men to mentor other men, to be supportive? And even when people are incarcerated, what do men need when they're being released? There needs to be a program. How do you release them back into the community, knowing that his partner is the person who he's going to go to? And yet he can't. He has to stay away from her. They can't communicate. And so, how do you support him to get the help that he needs so that this doesn't continue on? How do we educate our young people in our schools, in our churches, in our places of worship? Like, how do you hopefully educate people that violence in the family, there's no place for violence in the family. There's no place for violence against women or anyone in our society. It has to end. So it ends by people working together, acknowledging and saying that this is a real problem, that if it may not impact you right now, but it could impact your children because the partner they select, could have been raised in a violent home, could be someone who's violent. So you don't want that to carry on generation after generation. And that's my hope. I mean, I know that, working in this field for close to 40 years, you want to believe that you've made a difference in some way, that when you leave and you pass that on to a younger generation with new hopes and new, aspirations, that you leave it better than what you found it, and more hopeful that there is something for the future generations.
I can't tell if you're telepathic or we're telepathic.
I keep smirking to each other because it's like you'll be talking.
I have the next question.
And then I was
wanna
like,
ask.
I was
What's
about
your
to
hope?
say, so what do you think needs to be done then, or what will you do? And then you answered that, and then
Yeah.
like, what would your hopes be for the
I got
future? And then you
goosebumps
answered
now.
that.
Well, I did want to dig in a little bit to hear your perspective, and maybe you don't have an answer to this, but like when we spoke to Linda, we were like, what she's like, how I would think to help fix this problem is like, we need to be in the schools, teaching them about
Mhm.
consent and all those sorts of things. So dealing with such intense cases of domestic violence and knowing that it is so prevalent in our society, do you have any thoughts or ideas? And like, I think tactically, if we did these things as a community, this could help shift the perspective. Do you have any?
Yeah. Education is key, but it's not doing a piece of education for a few years. I mean, we're talking generation after generation after generation. That has to be ongoing. Training, training your staff, training police, training courts, training, all that education. And it's not that we know better than anyone else. It's sharing the piece of information that we have. And again, collaborating with other groups. because we're not the only ones that have that information or that power to exchange that information. It's something that we all have to do, and we all have to stay on top of and be aware of. There's other issues that crop up, mental health issues and addiction issues. Dealing with women that were fleeing intimate partner relationships 30, 40 years ago um, is similar to what women are still dealing with today. But there's all of these other issues, that are compiling on top of that. When I would see a woman many, many years ago, she might be a young woman who's a housewife, stay at home mom with two kids. And, there might have been a little bit of drinking or, some pot smoking or something like that. Now, the type of drugs, the type of mental health issues and concerns, again, the homelessness, all of those concerns have to be addressed as well. You can't just kind of put it aside and say that doesn't matter. So when you're talking to young people, it's, they're talking about financial security. They're talking about some basic life skills sometimes. And we know that because of what people are faced with now, the thoughts of having your own home, of pursuing a higher education, a lot of those opportunities are not there for young people. So how do we change that? How do we help them to, go forth in their lives in a healthy, happy way? So it's getting into the schools, it's continuing on into places of worship, workplaces, violence in the workplace. That's a real thing. It's not something that happened to a couple of women years ago. I'm still hearing from people that I work with who are talking about being sexually um, abused or harassment in the workplace. And we're in 2025. Like, this shouldn't be happening, but it is. It happens all the time. So we can't kind of, put that aside and say that's not, that was dealt with years ago. It's still not safe for women to walk down the street by themselves. It's still not safe for women to live in their homes in many cases. And we're now dealing with that whole issue of human trafficking. So people have to be educated. It has to be an ongoing thing.
Can we talk? Can we get
dig in a little bit
about human
about
trafficking?
human
What you're
trafficking.
seeing, why you believe it's becoming more prevalent, how people are finding themselves in that scenario?
Even, as recent as like 5 years ago, um, to say human trafficking, it was, what kind of numbers are you talking about? We're starting to hear about it. 5 years ago, we're starting to realize that more and more women were coming forward and not really identifying that they were victims of human trafficking. They would talk about having a boyfriend or having a situation where, if in exchange for sex, they would get maybe a nice purse, or they were helping out this new partner because he owed somebody money for drugs. And so if they performed some sexual favors for someone, that would be removed. Or they would get into a situation with family members and all of a sudden be set up on a date and didn't realize that the family member was getting paid for them to go out on this date. And sometimes there were drugs involved or sometimes some drinking, and then they blacked out and they didn't know what happened, but they suspected they were being sexually assaulted. Women coming forward, especially during the pandemic, who are in marital relationships or common law relationships, and talking about um, how they couldn't make rent, how they were going to be evicted. And so their husband or partner was saying, if you put yourself out there sexually, I'll bring in some guys, we'll be able to make some rent. Women who were talking about being evicted by a landlord because they didn't have enough rent money or the rent was being raised. and how they were performing sex acts in exchange for staying in their home for themselves and their kids. Survival sex. So, we were hearing all of these different stories and thinking, the common denominator is that often women were forced into it. If they were new to the country, we were having newcomers who were coming in, students sometimes, their passports, their IDs, everything were taken from them. They thought they were coming here to attend school, and it was a different situation completely than what they expected, and they were being trafficked. Older women who were being fed different types of illegal drugs and then told, thought it was being handed to them for free because they were addicted. And then by the drug traffickers saying, no, now you owe us, and this is how you're going to pay it off through trafficking. So a lot of different scenarios that we were trying to educate ourselves, trying to find other people outside of the community who could educate us on what really was happening with human trafficking. And the numbers were going up and up. And what we were seeing maybe prior to the pandemic was a couple women every year. We were seeing, throughout the pandemic, 13 a year, 18 a year, 20 a year. It just kept growing. And we decided in July of 2021 that we would dedicate that bedroom just strictly for human trafficking victims. And they could come right across Ontario or Canada. And we were getting calls from people saying, I have someone who could probably use that bed and needed those services because, something was going on here. So there's usually police involvement, victim services involvement from the hospital, those collaborations of services working with us and trying to help these women get free of this horrific type of trauma that they were going through.
Do you think there's a stigma around that when people think human trafficking, they think right away, oh, it's prostitution. People knew what they were getting into and they just did it, not realizing that there's so many nuances, especially with social media, that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of, even for individuals who are using those services, believe that these are prostitutes. These are women who are willingly just giving of themselves in exchange for money, when in fact there was someone who perhaps in the next room or in a bathroom was holding a gun and holding them against their will, holding them in seclusion, feeding them drugs, trying to keep them in a state of, they couldn't, of dependency and they couldn't get away, forcing them into it, threatening them, threatening their families, and saying, this is what you're going to do. I own you. And whether it's panhandling for money, because sometimes you'd see them at local grocery stores or asking for money and someone would be not too far away. Or again, in exchange for sex, drugs, or money for someone. It's just unbelievable situations that people were faced with.
When we spoke before, you told us a little bit about seeing a rise of younger women coming to it with grooming and also social media kind of coming into play, a friend of a friend, or trips. Could you tell us a little bit about grooming and what that is if people don't know what that is? How young people are finding themselves here.
Yeah, and I think, very young. Like, I think one of the youngest victims that we talked to was 16. And she told us about being involved in human trafficking since she was 14. Unfortunately, her family situation was she lost her mom, didn't have a dad, got involved with a fella in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, or what she thought was a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. And then he was trafficking her at a very young age, and before she knew it. or situations where teens are meeting up with someone maybe a little bit older at a mall, for example, and going out and doing some partying and having some fun as teens will, some drinking, maybe some drugs, and someone who, comes across as being very knowledgeable and very kind and caring towards them. And hey, let's go here and let's try this. And here's a new cell phone. And how about you give me your cell phone? And there's no way to trace them, no way to track them. And before they know it, they're in a different city or a different province, and in trouble. There's buyers out there who will buy people and transport them great distances, and sometimes they will not be coming back to their community. Sometimes they will be lost. And in some cases, young girls and young guys as well, who are in maybe families of lower income that are poverty stricken, and they don't have the nice clothes and the nice designer handbags. And so they're taken away for a weekend, maybe to Toronto, to Niagara Falls, and they come back and they have expensive, um, you know, Lululemon items, or, Kate Spade purses or something like this. And all of a sudden, they're being trafficked. And in exchange for sex, they're getting these items that they could not otherwise afford. So there's a lot of different tactics, a lot of different grooming. We've even had what they call bottom bitches coming into the shelter. And this is something that shelters have to be very much aware of. People who are looking, women who are claiming to be victims of human trafficking or intimate partner violence, and looking for easy targets, people who are vulnerable. And so you have to be very much aware of that. That's a concern who comes into a shelter now, who is asking for help. And those are things we never thought we'd ever deal with in the past. And now we are.
You mentioned the expression survival sex. For someone who might never have heard that or not know, what is survival sex, or what have you seen in that world?
Um, you know, with that comes a lot of shame and guilt. A lot of women who talk about, again, I didn't want to have sex with my landlord, but I couldn't make the rent. So it was put out, or I'll put you out. So, for a woman who has a couple young children and she has no money and she doesn't want to be homeless, she doesn't want to be living in an encampment or have her kids taken away, sometimes they find themselves doing things that they wouldn't normally do. Or women, single women who, have been couch surfing and end up in a situation with, I can recall one young woman who was talking about a friend, a male friend, who said, "Yeah, you can sleep here, but I got friends, and they might need some sexual favors. And if you want to stay here, this is what you're going to do." And so she has no opportunities, no other family members or friends around. And sometimes there's the addition of drugs. And when you're feeling already like you're defeated, and someone's offering you some drugs and you're getting hooked on drugs, as a means to cope with, the anger, the guilt, the trauma. Um, you're not going to go to police because you don't feel you're going to be heard or you're going to be believed. How did you get into that situation? Why did you allow yourself to get into that situation? And so sometimes people are doing things just out of sheer survival. One young woman who talked about, she was coming into this area as a way of getting away from a bad situation, a partner who was violent, was offered a ride here, and it was around midnight. She had two young children in the back seat of the car, and the guy pulled over in the middle of nowhere, dead of winter. I need you to do something for me, and otherwise you can get out and find your own way. She didn't have a cell phone. She didn't have means of transportation. She didn't even know where she was. So does she wake her kids up, or does she just perform the sex act that he's looking for? So there's a lot of different means of survival that women find themselves in situations and they don't know how to get out of. And, you know, they do things that sometimes they, under normal circumstances, they just wouldn't do.
And we've talked about this in multiple different ways with Linda as well, and then at the coalition, how why we're seeing so much domestic violence or sexual assault and that sort of thing is because the consequences aren't there for the perpetrators, or it's not enough to make them not want to keep offending, and so it gradually gets worse and worse.
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think that, again, in our society, we like to think I've often heard that Canada is a very safe country, that we spend a lot of time talking about community safety and, but sometimes when issues come up like intimate partner violence, part of it is that, we still believe and our minds are still trained, I think, at a very young age that you don't air your dirty laundry out in public. So, when it happens, when it takes place behind the privacy of closed doors, in that sanctity of the family, we tend to think of it as, well, that's between, consenting adults, and we don't want to get involved in that. And there's been a lot of, education and training and laws that have changed, but it's still the attitudes. If I was to walk down the street and I'm being attacked by a man and I'm screaming, at the top of my lungs, "Who are you? Leave me alone. Help," chances are people are going to come to my aid. But if I'm arguing with my partner and it looks very much like we're a couple, it's like, don't get involved. That's between, a husband and wife. Don't get involved in that. And unfortunately, that's still very much the same today. There's a lot of reluctance and resistance for women coming forward for a number of different reasons to contact the police, to go to court. It's a very lengthy process. And a lot of times people do not want their partners to lose their job. They don't want people to find out. Again, there's a lot of shame and guilt that surrounds this. And so for a lot of women, it's not just a simple matter of, I'm going to call the police, you're going to be arrested, I'm going to find all the supports from my family and friends, from community members, and I'm going to get out of this horrible situation and I'm going to move on. Because it doesn't work that way. It just simply doesn't work that way. Again, I'm not about pointing fingers who's to blame or who's at fault. I think that there's a lot of things, again, the education piece, the training piece with community members that will certainly make a difference, an impactful difference in the future.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk a little bit about, because this has come up a lot and how it's a newer thing even for Chatham with, oh yeah, mine's good, with the houselessness kind of on the rise and affordable housing on the rise, especially the encampment, which wasn't always a thing in the Chatham area. I'd love to hear your perspective on it, about the housing crisis or affordable housing and how you're seeing a relation to that of the numbers that you're seeing come in, or the clients, that the situations the clients are dealing with in relation to affordable housing, the encampment, housing crisis, etc.
Well, I think, with encampments, with affordable housing, homelessness, they're all connected. This isn't something that just happened overnight. We've always had a smaller number of population that were chronically homeless, that people preferred, or perhaps not preferred, but due to mental illness, due to addiction issues, were just not able to find housing and stay housed. That was a small number. And now, again, it seems like since the pandemic, we've seen that growing number of individuals who have lost their homes, who have lost their financial supports, their jobs. It's very easy for people to say, just go out and find a job. Just go out and become a better, individual, a better person in society and in the community, and everything will work out fine. People sometimes turn to addictions, to drugs, to alcohol, to gambling, as a means to an end. It's they're traumatized. They've got a lot of trauma. They have suffered through things that sometimes a lot of us have no idea. It could be sexual assault. It could be intimate partner violence. There's a direct correlation, and we're seeing a lot more of women who, again, are homeless. They're in encampments. They're being abused by a partner. Many of them have been sexually assaulted, have been beaten by strangers, have had their things stolen, and there just isn't a place for them to turn to. As we find the lack of social housing, we have people staying here beyond 6 to 10 weeks. Sometimes they're here for months, 6 months, 8 months. If we say to them, we can't house you any longer, you have to leave to allow other people to come in, now they're homeless. So that whole cycle just keeps repeating itself. So although we're funded for 15 beds per day, so 15 women and children, we find ourselves going out and purchasing more beds and bringing more women and children in, and they're staying here for a longer period of time. The homelessness issue is not something we're going to solve in the next year or 2 years. There has to be a national plan, a provincial plan. There has to be more social housing built. There has to be more opportunity for people to have not only social housing, but special needs housing, so that if they are struggling with addiction issues, that it's not just going into detox or rehab for 5 weeks. There has to be some housing options for them, or they're going to return back to the streets, back to that same issue over and over again. So we're dealing constantly with women who have multiple issues, those mental health, those addiction issues, and the housing issues as well. There's no right answer, really. There has to be a number of different options available. And, there has to be a place for individuals to go, that there's a homeless shelter. There has to be some cabins they're talking about doing now in Chatham-Kent. There has to be affordable housing. There has to be those special needs housing. There has to be a lot of different options available to people, because everybody's different and their needs are different.
Appreciate your perspective, though, as someone who has people in beds here, and what's the next step for them? How do we as a society set up follow-up steps so that we're not just repeating cycles of leaving here and going right back into it? And
the best case scenario for us is that a woman leaves here after a period of time and we never see her again. So all of her needs have been met. She's out of an abusive relationship. She has appropriate, safe, affordable housing. Food insecurity might be an issue, but she's managing. It would be great if people found employment and they could be self-sufficient, but we know that's not always the situation. So we know that sometimes people do have to be on Ontario Works or ODSP, some sort of subsidized way of providing rent and food for themselves and their families. But we want to see people to be moving forward, healthy, and safe. And so that's our goal.
I was going to ask one more question in that world. I know I spoke to a couple people who and they were like, oh, the ability to help those individuals maybe who are living in the encampment to kind of offer resources sometimes is difficult because there's no fixed address. So there's only so many municipal or federal things that we can lock into. Have you had cases of that here where you're...
Yeah, we have. Where people have applied for priority housing, SPP, but because they had no permanent address, they couldn't. So they were being abused by their intimate partner. There was violence in the encampment. They fled, but they could qualify for RGI and be put on a wait list that would probably be 2-3 years. But where do you go now? How do you deal with that now? So for many people, it was, it's just nobody really cares. This is a helpless situation, and this is where I'm going to be.
Then we can ask our sort of umbrella question back to the community documentary. We're asking everyone. The name of the project is called This Women's Work. Everyone has their own association with the term women's work. We know ours and why we've labeled the project this, but we've had various different answers from everyone we're asking. So for you, when you hear the expression women's work, what does that mean to you? And then if you could share your context of what it meant for your grandmother, your mother, yourself, and then what do you hope it means for future generations of women?
Oh gosh, that's a long question.
Yeah.
Women's work. I mean, I grew up in an era where, there was women's liberation and it was a time of change. The shelter movement was just starting back in the late 70s. So I was a young woman, late teens, and we were struggling to figure out where we belonged. I mean, I was doing work in this sector and feeling really good about it, really strong about it. And I remember going to the bank and trying to get a loan for a car. And this young fellow who was probably around my age, probably made about the same amount of money as I did at the time, said to me, are you married? Like, do you have a cosigner? Do you have a husband? Or how about your father who could cosign a loan for you? And I was so incensed. I was just so pissed off that he would ask me this. I got up and left. And I think I muddled something like, like, you should be embarrassed to ask me this. I'm a working woman. I work full time. And I probably make about the same as you do. And I left. And I just thought, to hell with this. I'll walk if I have to. Um, and I remember, my mom, she worked as a clerk, worked part-time. It was really long, hard hours, to make next to nothing, and was treated very poorly, in the hotel that she worked in. My grandmother, I don't think ever worked. I think she was a stay-at-home mom and had some health issues. But for me, I wanted an education. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. I saw enough violence growing up in my lifetime, and felt it myself that I wanted to make a change. And for me, calling it women's work, it was just something that needed to be done. And who better to do it than women? When I look at women that are doing this type of work, or policing, working in the courts. I'm so proud of them. I just, I feel a lot of hopefulness, and a lot of pride that I think as an older woman, who probably should have retired a long time ago, I enjoy the work. I enjoy being around women. And I enjoy the fact that so many positive things are still happening. Um, I think dream big. Why not? People should. Women should. There's a big world out there. dream big.
I love it.
Love it. Yeah.
Perfect. Beautiful answer.
Yeah, everything all across
Yes.
the board. Beautiful answers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Sister Strain.